Well, thank you for joining the Iowa Intermediary Network for another great state work-based learning event. We want to thank Iowa PBS and Paul Yeager for partnering with us on this topic, which is supply chains, food disruption in the COVID era. Paul, we want you to tell us a little bit about this topic before we dive into the full session.
Gina, it's something we cover every single week on the television program we call Market to Market. And it has, the show's been around for almost 50 years. And it seems like supply chain issues are always a story, but it's just been heightened in this pandemic world. We are dealing with supply chains of the items you get at the big box stores, those who have products on the farm that they're trying to ship somewhere, and those who are trying to get products back and return. It has been as the economy shifts into a global thing, it really is a thing. It is a mechanism that works. It's not just what goes on in your neighborhood, but we're finding out that maybe the neighborhood might just be a place to do some business as you wait on that slow boat to come from overseas.
Oh, that's a great teaser. Thanks for that, Paul. Everyone will want to hear what the session has to say about that topic. Shop local, right? Is that the message we're hearing?
That would be something that we probably should have covered a little bit, but we did talk to some local companies based in Iowa and those that do business in Iowa. If I may a little bit explain about who we talked to. This is going to look a lot like a regular market to market program, but it's done especially for this project. We talked with Pella-based Vermeer Manufacturing. They are 70 plus years of doing business. Their CEO told me they might get about 95% of the components needed to finish a piece of equipment. It's that last 5. And the thing is, it changes from beginning of the day to the end of the day. They've got stuff changing hour by hour. So what's it like to run a big manufacturing plant with hundreds of workers on things that are changing? Well, once that product is done, Gina, it's got to go somewhere. And the trucking industry is always in the headlines. There's congressional hearings about this all the time. Ruan Trucking, an Iowa-based company. You might not see Ruan on the side of the truck, but one of their logistics folks tells us about how they ship a dramatic amount of products for other companies. And they're talking about ways that the worker has changed the way they do business and the way that they are attracting new hires and keeping existing hires, because it is all about the workforce when it comes to trucking. There's some new ways of maybe relay trucking. That is a concept. You normally think of these truckers that go, they might be gone for weeks at a time. Now they're usually gone maybe 8 hours. They go 250 miles in one way, drop a load, pick up a different load, bring it back. They're at home that night and they're at that concert at their high school that night or the elementary school. And then there's the company that provides all the capital for this. CoBank is based in Colorado, just the name Co, but they're the biggest ag lender in the world or in the United States. And they have their fingers in a lot of different things that kind of figure out where trends are going. They're talking about they're giving money to co-ops, lending money to co-ops and other big businesses. And they really are paying attention to all of these, what industries are performing well, what ones need a little more assistance, what ones are getting good returns. So this is in thanks to partners who help find these interview subjects. And then one last thing that we do on the market to market shows, we have market analysis. So what show of market to market would be complete without a little bit of market analysis? I've got a couple of our analysts that I ask questions about inflation, and that is also a topic that is, are we seeing just a supply chain issue that's rising prices up, or is it the inflation bubble that's bursting? So we'll see how this all plays out.
Wow, there's a lot of content in this session, Paul. Thank you, like you said, to you, Iowa PBS, for producing this for us, as well as those who helped us find all these content experts to feature in this session. It's another great event from the Iowa Intermediary Network. So thank you all.
Coming up on Market to Market, supply chain challenges impact the way we manufacture, transport and source our goods, a special edition with Commodity Market Impact next.
This is a special edition of Market to Market, the weekly journal of rural America.
Hello, I'm Paul Yeager, and welcome to this special edition of our program. Many economic indicators are tied to the initial shutdown following COVID-19's surge in March of 2020. As 2021 ticked on, the comparison of month over month was looked at as a better indicator than year-over-year snapshots. But each day, even each hour, the situation was changing for those who produce food, fiber, and fuel. Yes, certain products had runs on them at the store. First, it was in the grocery aisle, then the electronics section. Now, the worker is the must-have item. We are going to look at supply chain issues impact from COVID-19. We begin with Iowa-based manufacturer of construction and agricultural equipment, Vermeer.
This sort of COVID leading into the supply chain challenge is something that's unprecedented. In the last quarterly meeting that we had for our team members at Vermeer, I said, we can't even look back and say it's not been this bad in 10 years or 20 years. It's never been this bad. So, we've been around for 73 years, and the supply chain challenges have never been this challenging. And, our suppliers are doing the best they can. We're having very transparent, straightforward conversations with them. It's just a matter of COVID caused companies to pull back, and instead of demand for goods tapering back, it actually accelerated, and we've been playing catch up ever since. And very much driven by workforce shortages. And the other thing, which is kind of hard to get your mind around, is you may have 95% of the components to build a machine, but it's not done until you have 100%. And so you have 95% of what you need, and you're waiting on that 5%, and that 5% keeps changing. It's not consistent. What is that final 5% that you need to finish a machine? And those are the challenges that our supply chain team are working on, literally not daily, but hourly, trying to make sure that we're getting the components in that we need.
That 5%, is there any, you talk about it shifting and evolving. Mm-hmm. Is there ever a part where you've said, well, why can't we just do that 5%? Because is Vermeer one of those companies that you didn't make everything here? You would bring in some supplies? Like a lot of the bigger ones have done that now. They don't make everything in-house that they used to. So have you had a discussion where you've said, well, maybe we're going to have to start doing some of these things ourselves?
We have had some of those discussions. It's interesting with regards to doing work with sheets of steel. We're actually quite vertically integrated as it is. We do a lot of our own bending, machining, turning, welding, a lot of the operations that have to do with the steel that makes up our equipment. And it's ironic, even though the price of steel has gone up like crazy, we have really not had significant challenges with regards to steel. But when we think of some of the other components, it's not as easy as just thinking that we're going to make them, because our suppliers have supply chain constraints. So if we decided that we were going to do what this supplier is doing, suddenly we would have the supply chain challenges that they already have. Mm-hmm.
What's been the biggest frustration in all of this?
You have huge demand, you have the facilities to do it, you've got the team to do it, and you just can't get in all the components you need to build the full machines. If we instantly had all the supply that we need, then we would instantly need to hire a lot more people. And we're really tailoring the rate at which we hire people based on trying to make sure we can keep work in front of those team members. So that's the biggest challenge, is just knowing that customers are going to wait months to get their hands on a piece of Vermeer equipment that they need. And we desperately want to build it faster, and we just can't.
I heard you give an interview recently where you said, we normally stock our equipment in a certain spot, kind of as like a launching point, a go point. Have you been able to do that this year?
No, and that has been another challenge. So far there has been a couple hurricanes that have hit the United States and caused damage, and it's not easy to kind of build up a stock that can be immediately deployed after a hurricane, but we like to try. And this year that has been more challenging than ever before. And so a hurricane strikes, our dealer will inform us of how much equipment they think that they will need to help and support and, get into the hands of their customers to do this work.
Give me two products that have been a challenge for you, maybe before and after, as you talk about the evolving 5%.
Yeah, and once again, it keeps changing. So at times it feels like, maybe hydraulic componentry is our number one issue. At times it feels like wiring harnesses are our number one issue. Engines, components that go into track systems, hoses for radiators and other hydraulic componentry. So it just keeps changing. But at the same time, once again, I feel as though our suppliers are, doing the best that they can to, get the workforce they need, to try to plan for it, to try to accommodate us. We have very constructive and transparent and straightforward conversations. It's just when the pandemic broke, everybody kind of pulled back, and we've been playing catch up ever since. And for a while, it felt like we were not too far away from starting to eat into our backlog, and now the past few months it's gone the wrong direction again, where our ability to build to meet demand just keeps falling farther behind. And we're not alone in that. We know from other manufacturers in Iowa and around the country, we're all in the same boat. It's all over the news, but yeah, it's just frustrating when customers are desperate to get their hands on a new piece of equipment and they've got months of backlog.
You've seen the pictures at the Port of Los Angeles as container ships are stacked like building blocks on shore while other cargo ships wait their turn in the water. Once on land, the trucking industry will be tasked with moving the goods to the next link in the supply chain. The trucking industry was short drivers before March of 2020, and the pandemic did little to ease the demand to get more people behind the wheel of a big rig. Ruan employs more than 4,000 drivers with routes across the country. The need to move goods from port to warehouse and eventually the retail outlet is high, and so are the hurdles. What's been the biggest challenge from where you sit in your company on the supply side issues over the last year and a half?
Yeah, I'd say there's been a few. The main one for us as an asset-based third-party logistics provider, we're about a $1.5 billion company. We move that much freight. We're a dedicated contract transportation company, so a lot of our freight, a lot of our customers' freight moves on our assets. We have about 4,500 drivers, about 4,000 tractors, 10,000 trailers. But we also manage about another 700 million of freight that moves on carrier partners that we work with, whether that's LTL, less than truckload, intermodal, shipping containers, that sort of thing. The biggest challenge we've seen is really around driver retention and recruiting. Now, if you'd asked our VP of HR, he would say, we don't have a recruiting problem, we have a retention problem. If we just kept every one of our drivers, we'd be okay. Well, that's true to a point, but the average age of our driver is about 49 years old. The average age of the driver in the industry is 57 years of age. The statistics show we're about 60,000 drivers short today, heading to probably 100,000 drivers short. Feeling is we need to hire about 1.1 million drivers into the industry over the next decade to be able to handle the freight that's moving. Everything in the U.S. moves by truck at one point or another, whether it's a part of a product or the finished goods, it's moving by truck. So really it's around, finding and retaining drivers. And some of the things we're doing really is focused on work schedule. Drivers don't leave because of pay typically. It's a very good profession, a very good paying profession. I think our drivers average around $75,000 a year, upwards of 100 in some instances. So it's a very good job for individuals. But we look at ways to get that driver home as much as possible. So we're looking at relays. We're looking at driver helpers. A lot of our, Ruan is a little different from some of the over-the-road carriers where all of our drivers and assets are dedicated to specific customers. So we go out and we make maybe a 15-stop delivery load for a customer, pick up some raw materials and come back home to that home domicile. So our drivers are home nightly, every other night, but whatever we can do to get that driver home so he or she can spend time with their family, go to the sporting events, go to the choir concert, whatever it is. That's more important than pay. It's really around that driver's schedule.
Do you have anecdotal stories of drivers that have made it to these ports? I mean, I'm thinking Los Angeles, Long Beach. I know that the San Francisco, Oakland port hasn't been as backed up, but where they're having to wait, and how does that impact at a port city where you're trying to maybe take a different load? What do you know about that situation?
Yeah, the container challenge is a huge issue, and there's a lot of issues with the containers today. So, you heard about the Suez Canal issue earlier this year. We're still feeling some, challenges from that happened way back in the summer. COVID the Delta variant has reared its ugly head, and we're seeing delays at a lot of the Asian ports, China ports, of getting product out because there just aren't enough material handlers to get those containers loaded on the ships. The bigger problem is once those containers get to the U.S., I think we're getting them processed, I think, fairly well here in the U.S., but those containers are so critical to get back to the Asia market that a lot of our exporters aren't able to get their product on those containers because what the shipping companies want to do is they want to ship them immediately back to China, right? Instead of having it, okay, maybe it ends up in Chicago, it drays to the customer there, they take their product off that came in from China or Vietnam or whatever. Maybe somebody else wants that container in Peoria to load it with outbound product going back. Well, they don't want to dray that trailer on a chassis down to Peoria, load it up, bring it back up to Chicago, put it back on the rail and get it back to Long Beach. They want to stick that empty container immediately back on the rail, get it back to Long Beach and back to China. So that's kind of causing an additional issue from a container shortage and bottleneck standpoint. To be that 3PL of choice or a shipper of choice, because a carrier, a driver, they only have 11 drive hours in the day to work and 14 work hours. So if they get to a grocery distribution center or a port or a railhead to get a trailer loaded or to drop and hook a trailer or container, and it takes them 4 hours, they've just eaten up, a big chunk of their day. And most drivers that are hauling long haul, they get paid by the mile and by the stop. So when they get delayed, it really impacts that driver's ability to earn a living. It impacts that carrier's ability to utilize their equipment and their team members as effectively as possible. So if you can get that driver in and out in 30 minutes, carriers and drivers want to go, deliver or pick up at that customer. If you constantly get delayed for 3 to 4 hours, then there's enough freight out there right now, Paul, the carriers can choose what they haul, and they'll choose not to haul somebody that delays them. So that could be part of the issue at the ports as well. When we first started dealing with COVID back in March, April of 2020, we had some of our customers where their volumes just plummeted. A lot of our manufacturing, some of our metals customers, right? They just didn't have freight to ship because their business was down. But we had other business that just spiked. A lot of our grocery business, a lot of our dairy, a lot of our food and beverage. Everybody talked about you couldn't find toilet paper on the shelves, right, at your Target or your Walmart. And so we're delivering a lot of that product. So we took those drivers and those assets that normally would have been delivering, products on the manufacturing side or on the metal side, and we moved them over to move groceries, to move pharma, medical supplies, oxygen to hospitals, other freight that we move. I mean, you name the type of trailing equipment, we have it. We're moving just about every type of product in the U.S.
The grocery store was the site of initial panic as toilet paper was the must-have item during the pandemic, the first item to show how demand can overwhelm a system that can only produce so much product, even in good conditions. As just-in-time inventory has been compromised in the United States, the planned shutdowns, spin-up lead times have been met with unrealistic expectations from consumers who have grown accustomed to an order today, deliver tomorrow mentality. The equity and commodity markets have taken notice of supply chain issues. The laws of supply and demand are constantly at work. Inflation is measured with several barometers from what the producer and consumer are paying for goods and services. CoBank provides loans in the agribusiness community and also keeps tabs on all of the data mentioned in this program. Had you ever seen an event like COVID that highlighted so many specialties at one time?
I think that'd be an understatement to say that. I mean, yes, no, excuse me, no, we have not seen anything like this, and I don't think anybody has. From all the stresses that we're seeing at the producer level with, fertilizer and chemical crop protectant issues, with prices going to historical highs if you can get it, all the way through processing, trying to process cattle, for instance, and you're seeing in the refrigerated cold or the cold chain, excuse me, that's a whole issue unto itself. So many aspects from farm to fork have been impacted by these logistics issues and the lack of labor, which is something we've always dealt with in agriculture perpetually over the years. And it just kind of came unfolding all at once. And I think agriculture sees that more so than other aspects of the U.S. economy because we are so labor and transportation intensive. It has really, I think, hit agriculture harder than most sectors.
I remember in the early days of this, March, April, May of 2020, there were stories about a oversupply issue. Potatoes, onions, green beans, whatever it was that was growing that was headed for a cruise, an entertainment venue, and all of that. Those were the stories early. Do those stories still exist of an oversupply of something that can't find its way to market?
I would say there's plenty of supply, generally speaking. The problem is trying to get it from point A to point Z. If you look at some of the data with cold storage, for instance, cold storage inventories of animal protein, meat, have been down quite a bit, 20% year over year. So there is a supply issue there, and that is because you got to go, again, back it up to the supply chain issue. Can you find the workers there to process those animals into the finished product the consumers need at the restaurant or at the grocery store? So I think that is, again, the major issue here. I don't think it's farmers producing too much. It's building up in warehouses because we can't get the truck drivers in place to move it from point A to point Z. And then once you get it to the consumer, you also have to add in the cost of transportation. The cost of fuel is rising. And so that complicates things even further. And I don't know if there's a lot that policymakers can do about it.
What's your take on how the grocery industry has had to pivot for what they put on the shelves in all of this?
Well, remember back where we were a little over a year ago, we had empty store shelves. There was a run on supplies. And so the industry had to realign very quickly, trying to get product in there. That was a huge demand on packaging, whether it's cans or cardboard, you name it, anything that was required there to reroute product from a restaurant to put it on a grocery store shelf required a lot of people trying to reinvent the wheel almost in short order. And as a result, what the grocery industry has done is they've become very smart, or a lot smarter about delivering product to consumers on the shelf. Now, that being said, that doesn't mean that everything is back to normal. I don't think there will ever be a return to normal. If you look at what's going on with restaurant sales, for instance, we've had a non-seasonal, we'll say, spike in animal protein demand. And our animal protein economist, Brian Ernest here at CoBank, has done some great work there analyzing what's going on. And it's really interesting to see these new consumer behaviors. Yes, they want to have that access to the grocery store and having food delivered to their home, but they're also itching to get out and spend some of this money that they've been saving. We're sitting on over $2 trillion in consumer savings after the pandemic. And I say after, we got to be careful about But they want to experience some level of normalcy. And so that's why we've seen phenomenal restaurant sales that you typically wouldn't see like we've seen in the last quarter. The consumer is striving for that normalcy, but at the same time, a lot of them learned how to click and collect on their groceries, then that behavior is not going away.
Once we get this worker issue addressed and things start getting to their destinations, what's going to be the next step that's going to need addressing here with a magic wand?
I would say our international trade issues are going to come back again because a lot of our agricultural supply chain actors, well, let's just say our processors, what have you, are concerned about the long term, about their market share overseas. They're losing market share because of these logistical issues. And so they are, for the most part, wanting to keep operations in the United States if possible. But the longer these supply chain issues persist, they're going to be forced to evaluate moving some operations overseas. Now, logistics are a big part of that, but at the same time as well, we have not renegotiated the tariffs and the retaliatory tariffs that we had under Trump. And that is going to be back on the table. It has to be if we want to be competitive in the global marketplace. So I'd say, again, being careful about using the words post-pandemic, but let's say at some point after we get a lot of these supply chain issues worked out, however long that is, trade internationally is going to be back on the table, and we can't step away from that. We have to keep our mind on where we are long term with maintaining our market share and growing our exports.
Each week, we bring an analyst here to discuss the trends in the commodity markets. Recently, during our Market Plus segment, which is available on our YouTube feed each week, we assembled a panel. We started discussing rising input costs for farmers, for fertilizer, feed, and seed, and some of those factors are balancing inflation, while others are more in a supply and demand force field.
Everybody eats, right? Everybody cares about food prices, but to the degree that you are producing that food, it matters too. And that kind of goes to what Naomi was talking about, the beef prices and inflation. When you saw the CPI numbers come out, actually the portion of that basket of goods that goes into the CPI calculation, the portion that comes from beef, that was one of the highest increases at 12.6%. And actually, if you look at choice box beef prices, those are about 33% higher than they were a year ago, but they're much better than they were in late August, right? Better from a consumer perspective. They've come back down to about $2.80. So that makes me think that perhaps we've seen the worst of it as far as food price inflation so far. We've kind of gone up and explored these highs, and this has been true for grains as well. We've explored some highs and come off of them. So from a consumer's perspective, it puts me in the mind to think that perhaps we've seen the worst of it, and it will continue because we are in an inflationary environment, just monetary and fiscally loose policy. That's just the way this is going to go. It will continue, but I think we've seen the biggest push already.
Ted, is the worst over?
I don't know. Naomi was talking about watching the dollar and how we've seen strength in the dollar, but we have to understand that the dollar is a basket, or is weighted against a basket of other currencies, and these other currencies are, these other economies and these other central banks are doing a lot of stimulus as well. I think the truer gauge of inflation is what's happening with the stock market, which continues to just go higher and higher and higher, even though, at least from my opinion, fundamentally, I don't think has much justification. That's inflation. And if that's going to keep happening, I don't see how we're not going to have that in other things. I don't feel like the inflation story is over. It might be cooling off a little bit. But hey, if they pass the $3.5 trillion stimulus, that's just another truckload of money you're just dumping on the economy. How do you not have inflation in those circumstances? So, yeah, I think this is inflation is not transitory is the new realization that I think we're coming to, and I think this is something that's going to be lasting for a while. It's really only going to end when we start having a completely different monetary policy and we start raising interest rates fairly aggressively, and I don't like how this is potentially going to end, but at least for right now, it could be a positive for some of the commodities that we watch and follow.
And that will do it for this installment of Market to Market. Links to our stories, video offerings, and full programs are available anytime at markettomarket.org. Our classroom project always is open with modules on technology, entrepreneurship, and the farm crisis of the 1980s. I'm Paul Yeager. Thank you so very much for watching this special edition of our program, and we'll see you next time.
Market to Market is a production of Iowa PBS, which is solely responsible for its content.